Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that made Sarah feel like the universe was conspiring in her favor. She had taken a personal day from the library, citing urgent home maintenance, which was technically true. Maintaining her sanity definitely qualified as urgent home maintenance. At 7:30 m sharp, Miguel's truck rumbled down Maple Grove, followed by a second vehicle loaded with bricks, mortar, and what appeared to be enough construction materials to build a small fortress. Sarah felt a flutter of nervous excitement as she watched the crew unload their equipment with military precision. Rebecca's BMW sat in the driveway like a gleaming white monument to entitlement, completely unaware that it was about to become a very expensive lawn ornament. "Morning, Sarah," Miguel called out cheerfully, gesturing toward the BMW. "I take it this belongs to your unwelcome guest." "That's her," Sarah confirmed. "She left about 20 minutes ago in an Uber. Based on her usual pattern, she won't be back until at least 4 o'clock. Miguel's partner, Carlos, surveyed the driveway with the calculating eye of someone who had built everything from garden walls to swimming pools. "Perfect positioning," he said, nodding approvingly. "We'll build it right along your property line, out 3 feet behind the car. She'll have maybe 6 inches of clearance, enough to open her doors, but nowhere near enough room to back out." "And you're absolutely certain this is legal?" Sarah asked, though she'd already confirmed this detail multiple times. "Completely legal," Miguel assured her. "You're building on your own property, you're not blocking any public access, and you're not damaging anyone else's belongings. The fact that someone else's car happens to be parked in an unfortunate location is not your problem." The construction began with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed performance. Miguel and Carlos worked in perfect synchronization, measuring twice and cutting once, laying each brick with the precision of master craftsmen. The wall grew steadily, rising from the ground like Sarah's confidence in her plan. By noon, curious neighbors had begun to gather. Mrs. Henderson appeared first, ostensibly to water her front garden, but clearly more interested in the construction project happening across the street. "That's quite a wall you're building there, Sarah," she called out, not even pretending to focus on her petunias. "Just a little landscaping project," Sarah replied innocently. "I thought the driveway needed some definition." Tom Johnson emerged from his house around 1 p.m., looking puzzled as he surveyed the growing wall. Sarah could see the exact moment when the implications of the wall's position registered on his face. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and he glanced nervously toward his own house as if expecting Rebecca to materialize and blame him for this development. "Sarah," he called out hesitantly, "that wall is going to block access to your driveway." "I know," Sarah replied with a smile that was all sunshine and innocence. "I'm planning to install a gate later. For now, I'm just enjoying the privacy." "But what about—" Tom's gaze shifted meaningfully toward the BMW. "What about what?" Sarah asked, her expression a masterpiece of confused innocence. Tom opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. He retreated into his house without another word, though Sarah noticed his living room curtains twitching periodically as he monitored the construction progress. By 3 p.m., the wall was complete. 4 feet high, 8 feet wide, constructed from beautiful red brick with decorative capstones that made it look like it had always been part of Sarah's landscaping plan. It was, Miguel declared with obvious pride, some of his finest work. "She's going to lose her mind when she sees this," Carlos observed, packing up the last of their tools. "I certainly hope so," Sarah replied, settling into a lawn chair she had strategically positioned on her front porch. She had no intention of missing Rebecca's reaction. At 4:17 p.m., a taxi pulled up to the curb and Rebecca Stone emerged in a flurry of shopping bags and righteous indignation. She was already talking loudly on her phone, something about a completely incompetent spa technician who had apparently failed to meet her exacting standards. Sarah watched with the anticipation of someone about to witness a fireworks display as Rebecca approached her BMW, still engaged in her heated phone conversation. For a moment, Rebecca didn't seem to notice anything amiss. She clicked her key fob to unlock the car, opened the driver's door, and began loading her shopping bags into the backseat. It wasn't until she tried to back out that reality crashed down on her like a ton of bricks, or more precisely, like a wall of bricks. The sequence of events that followed would be burned into Sarah's memory forever. First came the confused look as Rebecca craned her neck to see why her car wasn't moving. Then came the moment of dawning realization as she actually looked behind her and saw the wall. Then came the silence as she ended her phone call and simply stared at the brick barrier that appeared as if by magic. Finally came the sound that Sarah had been waiting for, a shriek of pure, unadulterated outrage that probably scared every bird within a 3-block radius. "What the hell is this?" Rebecca screamed, launching herself out of the BMW like it was on fire. "Where did this wall come from?" Sarah rose from her lawn chair with the calm dignity of someone who had been expecting this exact reaction. "Oh, hello, Rebecca. I see you've noticed my new landscaping." "Landscaping?" Rebecca's voice reached a pitch that could probably shatter glass. "You built a wall around my sar." "I built a wall on my property," Sarah corrected gently. "The location of your car is not my responsibility." For a moment, Rebecca stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then she began to pace frantically around the BMW, as if she could find some magical escape route that didn't involve acknowledging the reality of her situation. The war for Sarah's driveway had just reached its climactic battle. Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being a reasonable neighbor. In the 15 years she'd lived on Maple Street, she helped retrieve countless runaway trash cans after windstorms, shared garden vegetables with anyone who wanted them, and never once complained about the Johnson's dog barking at 6 a.m. every morning. But as she stood at her kitchen window on that crisp October morning, watching a gleaming white BMW SUV reverse into her driveway for the third time that week, Sarah felt her patience snap like a rubber band stretched too far. The woman behind the wheel wasn't just any neighbor. She was Linda Harwick, the newest addition to the street who'd moved in 2 months ago to help care for her elderly mother, Mrs. Peterson, who lived directly across from Sarah's modest 2-story colonial. What had started as an occasional inconvenience had rapidly escalated into a daily territorial invasion that made Sarah's blood pressure spike every time she glimpsed that pristine white vehicle claiming her property as if it belonged there. Sarah's driveway wasn't particularly large, just wide enough for 2 cars if you park strategically, but it was hers. She'd spent her own money having it repaved 3 years ago, and the old asphalt had cracked beyond repair, and she carefully planted decorative shrubs along the borders to make it look welcoming. Now, every morning when she left for her job at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade, she had to squeeze past Linda's SUV like she was the intruder in her own space. The first time it happened, Sarah had assumed it was a mistake. She'd knocked on Mrs. Peterson's door, politely explaining that the BMW was blocking her ability to park properly. Linda had emerged from the house with an apologetic smile, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light, and moved the vehicle with what seemed like genuine embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," Linda had said, her manicure hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "I'm still getting used to the neighborhood. Mother's driveway is so narrow, and I was afraid I'd scratch my car on her bushes." Sarah had accepted the explanation graciously, even offering a friendly wave as Linda repositioned her SUV in Mrs. Peterson's cramped driveway. But the next week, it happened again, and then again. Each time, Linda's apologies became less convincing and more irritated, as if Sarah were the unreasonable one for expecting to use her own driveway. By the 4th incident, Linda's mask had slipped entirely. When Sarah approached her this time, the blonde woman had rolled down her window with obvious annoyance, not even bothering to turn off her engine. "Look, Sarah," Linda had said, using her name like a weapon, "I'm only here temporarily while I help Mother with her medications and appointments. Your driveway is just more convenient for me, and it's not like you have multiple cars. Can't you just park on the street for a few weeks until I get Mother's situation sorted out?" The audacity had left Sarah momentarily speechless. She'd stood there, mouth slightly open, watching Linda adjust her rearview mirror as if the conversation were already over. The dismissive gesture had stung more than the words themselves, transforming Sarah's mild irritation into something much sharper and more determined. That evening, Sarah had made her decision. If Linda Harwick thought she could bulldoze her way through life, taking whatever she wanted with a smile and a shrug, she was about to learn otherwise. Some lessons, Sarah mused as she opened her laptop to research local contractors, were best taught in brick and mortar. The next morning brought a revelation that transformed Sarah's simmering anger into cold, calculated determination. As she sipped her coffee and watched Linda's now familiar routine, parking in Sarah's driveway, strutting across the street with her designer handbag swinging and disappearing into Mrs. Peterson's house for what appeared to be a leisurely visit rather than urgent caregiving, Sarah realized this wasn't temporary at all. Through her kitchen window, she observed Linda settling into Mrs. Peterson's sunroom with a cup of tea and what looked suspiciously like a fashion magazine. The woman wasn't rushing around administering medications or helping with appointments. She was treating her mother's house like a personal retreat center and Sarah's driveway like her private parking garage. "Convenient, my foot," Sarah muttered, setting down her mug with more force than necessary. That afternoon, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. She had research to do and couldn't wait. Her first stop was the county recorder's office, where a helpful clerk named Janet confirmed what Sarah already knew. Her property line extended exactly to where she always believed it did. The driveway was entirely hers, and she had every legal right to control access to it. "Looking to put up a fence?" Janet asked conversationally, noting Sarah's interest in property boundary regulations. "Something like that," Sarah replied, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Her next stop was Peterson's Hardware, the family-owned store that had served the community for 40 years. Old Mr. Peterson, no relation to her neighbor, greeted her with his usual warmth, his weathered hands gesturing enthusiastically as she explained her landscaping project. "You want to create a border feature," he nodded sagely. "Something decorative but functional." "I got just the thing," reclaimed brick from a downtown renovation. "Beautiful red clay, perfect for a short decorative wall." "You thinking me high?" "Waist high." Sarah considered this carefully. Too low and Linda might simply drive over it, potentially damaging both the wall and her precious BMW. Too high and it might violate neighborhood aesthetics codes. About 3 feet, she decided. High enough to be clearly intentional, low enough to look like landscaping. Smart woman, Mr. Peterson chuckled. "You'll want to check with the city about permits, but for a decorative garden wall under 4 feet on your own property, you should be fine. I can recommend a good mason. My nephew Tommy does excellent work, and he's between jobs right now." The pieces were falling into place beautifully. Sarah arranged to meet Tommy Peterson the following evening when Linda typically finished her caregiving and departed for the day. She wanted to walk the property line with him, discuss the project, and most importantly, get a timeline for construction. That evening, Sarah's phone rang. It was her sister Maria calling from Phoenix. "You sound different," Maria observed after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "Energized? What's going on?" Sarah found herself explaining the entire situation, from Linda's first accidental parking incident to her growing realization that she was being systematically taken advantage of. Maria listened with increasing amusement. "So you're building a wall to keep out your neighbor's car?" Maria laughed. "Sarah, this is so unlike you. Usually you just keep accommodating people until they walked all over you completely." "Maybe that's the problem," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Maybe I've been too accommodating for too long. Linda thinks she can just take what she wants because I'm too polite to stop her. Well, she's about to learn that politeness has limits." "I love this new you," Maria said, "but are you sure you want to go nuclear over a parking spot?" Sarah looked out her window at the empty driveway, and imagined Linda's face when she discovered her convenient parking arrangement had been permanently terminated. "Oh, I'm not going nuclear," she said softly. "I'm going architectural." Tommy Peterson turned out to be everything his uncle had promised: professional, efficient, and delightfully discreet. The stocky man in his 30s walked Sarah's property line with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared about his craft, taking measurements and photos while discussing the finer points of foundation depth and drainage. "You want this to last," he said, kneeling to examine the soil composition where the wall would anchor. "No point building something that'll shift or crack after the first hard freeze. We'll dig down 18 inches, lay a proper foundation, and build her up nice and straight." 3 feet high, you said?" "Exactly 3 feet," Sarah confirmed. "And I want it to look intentional, like it was always meant to be there." "Oh, it'll look beautiful," Tommy assured her. "That reclaimed brick has character. We'll cap it with some limestone, maybe add a few decorative planters on top. Your neighbors will think you hired a fancy landscape architect." They agreed on a timeline that made Sarah's heart race with anticipation. Tommy could start the following Monday, in just 4 days, and promised to have the wall completed by Thursday evening. The timing was perfect. Linda's pattern had become predictable enough that Sarah could practically set her watch by the BMW's daily arrival. "One thing, though," Tommy said as they shook hands on the deal. "You might want to put up some temporary markers this weekend just to establish the boundary visually. Some people get confused about property lines when construction starts." Sarah's smile was probably sharper than it should have been. "I don't think confusion will be a problem." Saturday morning brought unexpected drama. Sarah was in her garden, innocently installing small orange flags along her property line, exactly where Tommy had marked for the wall foundation, when Linda's BMW pulled into the driveway with more force than usual. The slam of the car door sounded like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. "What the hell are those?" Linda demanded, her usual polished composure cracking as she gestured at the bright flags. Sarah straightened slowly, her gardening gloves still dirty from planting the boundary markers. "Property line markers," she said calmly. "I'm having some landscaping work done." "Landscaping work?" Linda's voice climbed an octave. "What kind of landscaping work requires flags right where I park?" "The kind that happens on my property," Sarah replied, her tone remaining perfectly pleasant. "Speaking of which, you're currently standing on my landscaping project." Linda's face flushed red beneath her foundation. "You can't be serious. You're going to ruin my parking arrangement over some petty landscaping?" The word petty hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, the last vestige of her people-pleasing nature finally snapping free. "Linda," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that surprised them both, "there never was a parking arrangement. There was you taking my driveway without permission and me being too polite to stop you. That politeness has officially expired." "This is ridiculous," Linda sputtered. "I'm helping an elderly woman. I have a right to convenient parking. You have a right to park in your mother-in-law's driveway on the street or anywhere else that isn't my private property, Sarah said, pulling off her gardening gloves with deliberate slowness. What you don't have is a right to my driveway, my politeness, or my continued accommodation of your entitled behavior. For a moment, Linda looked genuinely shocked, as if the concept of someone refusing her demands was entirely foreign. Then her expression hardened into something ugly and familiar, the look of someone accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. We'll see about that, Linda snapped, stalking back to her BMW. I know people in this town. I can make things very difficult for you. Sarah watched the white SUV reverse out of her driveway with aggressive jerks and unnecessary revving. As the engine noise faded down the street, she realized she was smiling. Really, genuinely smiling for the first time in months. On Sunday evening, she called Tommy to confirm the Monday start date. Everything's still on schedule, he assured her. I'll be there at 7 a.m. sharp. Fair warning, though, I start early and we'll be using a small excavator for the foundation work. It might be a bit noisy. Perfect, Sarah said, thinking of Linda's habit of sleeping in until at least 9. The noisier, the better. 3 weeks after the wall's completion, Sarah was tending to the small herb garden she planted along its base when Mrs. Peterson shuffled across the street, moving slowly with her walker but with obvious determination. I owe you an apology, dear, the elderly woman said, her voice carrying the weight of genuine regret. I had no idea Linda was using your driveway. She told me you'd offered it to her as a neighborly gesture. Sarah straightened, wiping soil from her hands. She wondered when this conversation would come. Mrs. Peterson, you don't need to apologize for anything. Linda made her own choices. No, I do need to apologize, the older woman insisted, settling carefully onto the limestone cap of the wall as if it were a bench designed exactly for that purpose. Linda's always been demanding. Even as a child, she expected the world to rearrange itself for her convenience. I thought maybe having to help with my care might teach her some humility, but instead she just found new ways to impose on others. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the morning traffic navigate around a street that no longer included Linda's illegally parked BMW. Her routine had shifted throughout the neighborhood. People walked their dogs past Sarah's beautiful new wall. Children admired the neat rows of herbs, and several neighbors had complimented the addition during casual conversations. She's gone, Mrs. Peterson said quietly. Moved back to the city yesterday. Said rural life was too restrictive of some of her standards. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and surprisingly, a small pang of something that might have been pity. I'm sorry you won't help anymore. Mrs. Peterson chuckled, a sound like rustling leaves. Oh, my dear, Linda wasn't helping. She was visiting twice a week, drinking my tea, reading magazines, and using my house as an excuse to avoid her real responsibilities in the city. My actual help comes from the wonderful home health aide the county provides, a lovely woman named Carmen who actually knows the difference between caregiving and socializing. The revelation shouldn't have surprised Sarah, but it still amazed her how Linda had managed to manipulate even the narrative of her supposed selflessness. The wall is beautiful, by the way, Mrs. Peterson continued. It gives the whole street more character. And I've noticed you're growing herbs along it. Would you mind if I took some basil for my cooking? These old hands aren't much good for gardening anymore. Of course, Sarah said warmly. Take whatever you'd like. That's what neighbors do. Over the following months, the wall became something of a neighborhood landmark. Children balanced along its smooth limestone cap while walking to school. The mailman used it as a convenient spot to organize packages during busy delivery days. Sarah's herb garden flourished, providing fresh seasonings for half the street, and she'd added a small wooden sign reading Community Herb Garden. Please help yourself. The transformation went beyond the physical structure. Sarah found herself standing straighter, speaking up more quickly when situations felt unfair, and generally approaching life with a confidence she hadn't possessed before. Her sister Maria visited for Thanksgiving and marveled at the change. You built more than a wall, Maria observed, helping Sarah harvest rosemary for their holiday dinner. You built boundaries, real ones. Sarah nodded, running her hand along the solid brick surface. I spent so many years being afraid that standing up for myself would make me the bad guy. But there's a difference between being kind and being a doormat. Linda taught me that lesson even if she didn't mean to. The final vindication came in the form of a letter that arrived 6 months after Linda's departure. Written on expensive stationery and mailed from the city, it contained a single paragraph. Sarah, I want you to know that my lawyer reviewed the entire situation and confirmed that your wall construction was completely legal and within your rights. I may not have agreed with your methods, but I respect that you stood up for your property. Perhaps we both learned something from this experience. Linda, Sarah read the letter twice, then carefully filed it away. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that was enough. That evening, she sat on her front porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint her brick wall in shades of gold and amber. The structure stood exactly where it belonged, marking the boundary between her property and the world beyond, beautiful and functional and permanent. Some lessons, Sarah reflected, were indeed best taught in brick and mortar. And some walls, rather than dividing people, actually helped everyone understand exactly where they stood.